So when I look at individuals, groups of individuals, institutions, governments, any of the above, if they're using force or coercion, even if I like them, even if I agree with them on a lot of things, that force or coercion is dangerous. And that's my overall rubric for all the bad stuff in Revelation. It's really simple, but that's kind of Jesus's ministry, and then those are the two things I fall back on when I get overwhelmed with it all. Dr. Rosario knows a whole lot more about the topic, and I look forward to learning. Thank you.
Good morning, saints. Feliz Sábado. I heard that for Sabbath school, the saints kind of stroll in, and I see you guys are all spread out in typical Adventist tradition. If we were at Loma Linda in the classroom in the lecture hall, we would just give you like a big rebuke. But we're in the house of the Lord, so we won't do that. Last night I made this claim. I made the claim that a critique of Christian nationalism is literally baked into Adventist theology. Okay, I made that claim. Today, Christians who are wanting to speak into this issue or to oppose or to challenge Christian nationalism, they would go to the Bible and they would study the life and teachings of Jesus, and it would become apparent as they make the connections. They would have to apply those things to the current political landscape, right, in the nation. That's all great. I'm making a different kind of claim. I'm saying that Adventists, right, the original generation of Adventists, did not have to even do that. They didn't have to even draw links and parallels and applications to the political situation in their day. Why? Because they arrived at certain interpretations of Bible prophecy that literally had baked into it a critique of Christian nationalism. I don't know if that makes sense. My conclusion there is that the last people of faith on planet Earth that would be susceptible to getting sucked into an ideology of Christian nationalism would be those weird people that call themselves Seventh-day Adventists, right? They should be the most inoculated against that type of ideology. And the reason is because it was written into the doctrine. And that's what I want to talk to you about during this Sabbath school session. In what sense was that type of critique written into Adventist theology, baked into the system, so to speak? Well, no other group of American Protestants in the 19th century were more obsessed. Okay, I'm just going to say it. This is family talk. I'm going to put it out there. Nobody was more obsessed with the book of Revelation than Seventh-day Adventists. Full stop, right? And if there was a group of American Christians in the 19th century that were more obsessed than Adventists, they are yet to be discovered, right, in the historical records. We have not yet been introduced to them in American history. That's my claim, right? Adventists, beginning in at least the 1850s, like the early 1850s, poured an enormous amount of energy and time and ink into parsing the prophecies of the book of Revelation. They believed that the book of Revelation was not some riddle, not some code to be cracked, but they believed, as Ashley said, that it was a revelation of Jesus Christ. So when they're looking at the book of Revelation, they're seeing, yes, it's cryptic imagery, that it was depicting a cosmic narrative, a controversy between good and evil, a controversy between God and the corrupt powers. So this is a framework that becomes super politically charged for the first generation of Adventists. I also said last night, I was given an opportunity during Q&A to clarify. My critique of Christian nationalism is not to say that Adventists should not be politically engaged. Quite the opposite, right? the early generation of Adventists who read the book of Revelation, instead of their reading of Revelation making them fixated with the second coming of Jesus that's coming sometime in the future, so much so that they forgot about the issues happening in the world around them. You guys heard the phrase, can you help me? How does it go? Too heavily minded for any earthly good, right? So obsessed with the future second coming of Jesus that they check out in regard to the issues, the pressing social and political issues of their day. That may describe Adventism in your and my generation today in the modern world. Thank you, brother. That does not describe the Adventism of the early generation. I think that is a critical point to make. So, to understand how Adventists get there, how did Adventists arrive to the point where they view the book of Revelation as a political critique against the abuse of power, because it juxtaposes the beauty of the character of Jesus, okay? And so this is kind of a framework that they're working on. So we need to remember what the book of Revelation really is. The book of Revelation is written in the 1st century, right? And it's written to Christian communities in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. You've had people come here to talk about it. You have John Pauline and all these scholars talk about the book of Revelation. So you don't need to hear that from me. But the original audience were under Roman imperial rule. Now track with me here. You're going to see how this relates to America in prophecy. John, the writer of the book of Revelation, tells his readers that he was being persecuted in the Roman Empire for his testimony for Christ, right? Banished in the Isle of Patmos, as you know. He suggests to his readers that the message of Jesus was a threat to Rome. Furthermore, he says that Jesus, or his readers would have known, that Jesus himself was executed in the Roman Empire under the charge of treason, right? Does all this sound political to you? It sounds pretty political to me, right? The setting of what's going on in the text is richly political. We can't pretend that it is not. So the gospel from the declaration of the book of Revelation says that it is a challenge to empire, to the abuse of power. Okay. Just a side note here. I lament that Adventists no longer frame the book of Revelation in this way. I think we have lost a whole lot of powerful insight and perspective by somehow making the book of Revelation some prophetic code that is telling us what's happening in the Vatican every week, right? Rather than viewing it as a framework, as a lens, in order to interpret much deeper things in this side of the world. So Revelation unmasks the worship of power. Okay, and as I'm talking, you might be thinking in the back of your mind, this has resonances with Christian nationalist ideology. The worship of power. Is it Caesar or is it the Lamb? Right? And that's the conflict that's in the book of Revelation. And I want you to hold that word lamb in your pocket because we're going to pull that out here in a second. And it's going to be explosive for the generation of Adventists who heard it for the first time. So if you want to do a quick exercise, just enter into this as if you've never heard Revelation 13. And I think the effect hits you hard. If you imagine the first time you would have heard this. It's kind of explosive. So, Adventists in the 1850s depicted the United States as Rome 2.0. Okay? So they recognized that the same gospel that challenged Rome was the same gospel that was challenging every empire through history, including their own, the American empire. And that's why I call this a scandalous prophecy. Because as we discovered last night, Adventism takes shape. It becomes a denomination in 1863, smack in the middle of the Civil War, a moment in history where whether or not you are a patriotic American is a big deal. And how you walk around talking about the United States, the American Republic, is a big deal. And to try to criticize the American nation, it was not the time to be walking around preaching provocative sermons against the U.S. government. And so this is what brings us to the claim that made Adventists notorious, and we can say prophetic. Let me see if I can fire up our slides here. Are you seeing my next slide? You're not seeing my next slide. What if I unplug and replug? We'll try that. So Revelation 13 is where the story begins. Because what Adventists do is they begin to read Revelation, and in chapter 13, they read verse 11. And I don't see the slides, forgive me, but you're just going to have to use your imagination. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 11, it says that there was a beast that was rising out of the earth, and it had two horns. Can you guys finish it for me? Like a lamb, right? But when it opened its mouth and it spoke like a dragon. Okay, so imagine the first time you would have heard this passage, and imagine the first time you would have read an article about this prophecy with the claim that this beast rising up in this text is representing the United States of America. Okay, this is the conclusion Adventists came to. The United States, the land of the free, was the lamb-like beast that would speak like a dragon. And in all of this, they had to constantly clarify that they weren't attacking America per se. They were exposing the hypocrisy. Government that professes liberty and acts with oppression. That is the voice of the dragon. And we're going to get to that here in a second. But Adventists were not inventing this prophetic paradigm. They were building on a long tradition of Protestant interpretations. Martin Luther, during the Protestant Reformation, Calvin, little later John Wesley, all of the major Protestant reformers went to the book of Revelation to look for what they believed was an unfolding narrative of the rise and fall of empires, and specifically, they looked to the book of Revelation because in chapter 13, before that second beast rises with those two horns like a lamb that speaks like a dragon, the first beast that rises, virtually all Protestant reformers believe that was papal Christendom. That was representative of the papacy. That's what virtually all Protestant reformers believed with this first beast. And Adventists picked up on that tradition, and what they did is they built on it, and they added a crazy twist to that tradition in how they came to interpret the second beast of the prophecy. So the first beast of the prophecy of Revelation 13, the beast that rises from the sea, represented in all Protestant history the papal system, right? The second beast that rises with two horns like a lamb, most of Protestant history was like, we don't really know, right? There's no consensus among Protestant reformers what that second beast represented, right? Adventists show up to the scene, and it wasn't until 1851, where a young scholar by the name of John Andrews, does that name sound familiar to any of you? Any of you heavy sevies? J.N. Andrews. He becomes the first Adventist intellectual that will actually put in the work to parse the details of Revelation chapter 13 and try to figure out, through a combination of history and theology, who this second beast represents. And he writes this famous treatise in the Review and Herald. Are my slides up? No? They're not up, okay? Use your imaginations. He writes this incredible treatise, and what makes this powerful is that John N. Andrews is possibly one of the most politically connected of all the Adventist pioneers. I don't know if you're aware of that. Ellen White, when you look at her past, she doesn't have much political connections, Ellen White, in her day. Some of the pioneers did, and J.N. Andrews is possibly one of the more politically connected. He is from a patriotic New England family, steeped in politics and law. His grandfathers were veterans of the American Revolution. His uncle served in Congress. Okay, this is what we're talking about. Andrews once considered a career in law and politics, but something interrupts him. He runs into the Adventist message, and it rediverts him into broadcasting this message around the world. He pursues theology and ministry. He is a gifted linguist in multiple languages. So in 1851, he writes this detailed essay, and he arrives to the conclusion that the beast coming up out of the earth is, in fact, the United States of America. And what that article does is it crystallizes this interpretation for a whole generation of Adventist intellectuals. And thinker after thinker after thinker, they begin to write article after article after article, and it's published in the Adventist press. Adventist evangelists travel around in the big tent meetings, and they're thundering this message from the pulpit. And so what they do is they hone in on 3 identifying markers. Some of you listen to this are like, man, this sounds like a Revelation series, right? The last time you heard anything about this was during some evangelist that rolled up into your church and did a Revelation series, right? I think that's unfortunate, because this particular concept has way more implications than just what you would present at a Revelation seminar. But they hone in on 3 specific identifying markers of this second beast with 2 horns and speaks like a dragon, okay? Identifying marker number 1, the timing of the beast. When the beast rises in the history, and Adventists interpreted it this way. The first beast, remember, what did the first beast represent to most of Protestant reformers in the past? The papal system, yes? The text in Revelation 13 tells us that when the first beast is wounded, it uses this language, when it is wounded, that is the moment in history when the second beast begins to rise with these 2 horns like a lamb, okay? When the first beast is wounded, the second beast begins to rise. So Adventists, what they did is they dipped into Protestant tradition, right? And the tradition was that the papacy received a wound during the French Revolution when Napoleon marched his armies into Rome and took the Pope captive. And at that moment in time, the papal system received a wound. And they looked and they mapped all this out, and they brought in other historians. You see this all in Adventist writings. They knew that they were making a crazy claim, and they better back this up with all the history and all the reputable sources that they can find. And this event took place in the year 1798. And so 1798 becomes this hugely significant date in Adventist interpretation of prophecy. And so if the first beast is wounded first and then the second beast rises, then they connected the dots. Whatever this second beast represents with this lamb-like horns, it will show up into world history sometime at the end of the 18th century, right? In the 1790s, it will really show itself. And so all of this pointed them to this particular period in history. So you can see how they're beginning to map this out. So that's the timing of the beast. After the timing of the beast, the next marker was the location. So geography played a big role here. So you have the timing and then you have the location. The text in Revelation 13 tells us that the beast rises out of the earth. Okay, now we have a geographical location mapping, but the earth is not very helpful, is it? To locate this beast. And so they notice that this is symbolic language. The first beast rises out of the sea, and Revelation says that the sea is a densely populated area. And they said, well, that makes sense, because the papacy is smack in the heart of Western Europe, in the matrix of all these old European empires, right? So if the sea represented a densely populated area, then the beast that comes out of the earth must represent a contrast. This second power that will show up in world history will arise at a place in the world that is sparsely populated. And so they begin to map this out. And at that time, there was a popular belief that empires have a westward progression. Empires have a westward progression in history. They move westward. And so from this they came to the conclusion that it would have to arise in the New World. It would have to arise in a region separate from the dense cluster of European empires. And so that brought them to the New World. And they quoted different historians that I won't bore you with, but I just want to tell you that all of these points of interpretation were backed up. They knew they had to back this up through history because they knew that they were going to be under intense scrutiny for making this scandalous claim. So they quoted the founding fathers like John Adams, who all referred to the United States, to the American empire, as a rising in this like sparsely populated region of the world. And finally, the third point, the third characteristic. So we have the timing, we have the geographical location, and then the third point is we have the character, the disposition of this emperor. And then this is where it really gets, this is where they really get to the point. And the character is represented by how the beast is described. It's 2 horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. This will be a power, right? This will be a power that will masquerade as a lamb, but will actually behave like a vicious dragon. That was the thing. Now, here's the interesting thing. The word revelation, can you guys use your imagination? Imagine a slide up there, okay? The word lamb in the book of Revelation occurs over 20 times. Don't worry about it, brother. Don't worry about it. The ship has sailed. The word lamb in the book of Revelation occurs over 20 times. Think about that for a second. Over 20 times in these visions, the lamb this, the lamb that, and every time they're referring to Jesus. And then you have this odd instance in Revelation 13 about this mysterious power that shows up, and it is referred to as lamb-like. You following me? So they're like, wait a second. And you tell me if this does not scream Christian nationalism. You tell me. They're like, wait a second. If lamb is code word in the book of Revelation for Jesus Christ, and now the revelator is envisioning this power that arises, and it will present itself to society as lamb-like. What we're looking for is a power that will show up in world history towards the end of the 18th century, towards the end of the 1790s, right? Ding, 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 alarm bells, right? It will show up somewhere in the New World. And when it does rise, it will present itself to the world as lamb-like. Right? And so they immediately, in their 19th century context, they connected the dots. We live in a nation that claims to be a Christian nation. Right? And so all of these signs to them pointed to the inevitable conclusion that the power depicted here was speaking about their own nation, the United States. And the key point here is the profession of Christianity. The claim that this nation was somehow ordained by God to do some special thing in the world, and that God was backing the project of this republic that would enter into the world, right? And those 2 horns, come on, heavy sevies, those 2 horns represented 2 key principles in the American creed: civil liberty and religious liberty, right? It's right there in the text. You'll see that not in Revelation, but it's in the Adventist text. They're just making all these like connections. They're saying, aha, so this is a civil power that will arise at this time and in this place. It will present itself as Christian, and it will advertise that it stands for 2 cardinal principles for the foundation of its government: civil liberty and religious liberty. And that's why it has 2 horns of these Christ-like horns. You tracking with me so far? You think I'm going to have the piano playing, make an appeal for our evangelistic revelation seminar? The punchline, of course, because that's not the end of the prophecy. The punchline is that last little thing, that last little clause, and it will speak like a dragon. Okay, so I know that for some of you sitting here, you're like, come on, brother, I've heard this. I grew up with, tofu in my mouth. I'm a heavy sevi. I was, fed soy milk. I was breastfed soy milk. I'm so Adventist, you can't even imagine. Why are you repeating this to me, right? The thing is, this has so much relevance to this particular theme that when it speaks like a dragon, what does that mean? It means that the voice of the state, its laws, you'll see Ellen White say this in a second, or you'll hear her say this in a second. Its actions will betray its ideals. The same hands that raise the banner of liberty can also enforce oppression. The same mouth that praises God could also legislate injustice. So Ellen White comes into this picture, and what does she do? Ellen White didn't come up with these teachings. At the university, I'm often asked by students about how Ellen White came up with all of these Adventist teachings. Well, Ellen White didn't come up with any of this. This is all crystallizing, and then Ellen White then speaks into it, and she writes a little book called The Great Controversy. And what she do? She takes her little Ellen White stamp, right? And she puts her stamp on that particular interpretation of the prophecy. And it gives it authority, it gives it credibility, and Adventists basically accept this as this becomes part of the collective consciousness of the first generation of Seventh-day Adventists. What's the point? Why does this matter? This is why it matters. Because the moment they crystallize that 1851, this is early, so early, right? It immediately challenges the main tenets of Christian nationalism. Let's break it down. Christian nationalism is based on a series of assumptions. Assumption number one, that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. Yes? Two, that most of the citizens in the United States are truly Christian. Now, you should see what Adventists have to say about that in the 1850s. Number three, that the government itself reflected Christian ideals. Number four, finally, that the United States was God's chosen nation. Okay, that is the creed of Christian nationalism. So can you see now what I am saying when I say that Adventism has baked into its eschatological framework a critique against everything that Christian nationalism stands for? It's baked into the cake. You see what I'm saying? So it is in response, as I said yesterday, right? As this ideology is rising, Adventism is beginning to take shape. They don't even have 5 minutes as a denomination to breathe before they have to respond to the ideology of Christian nationalism. They have to do that from the gate, like after the amen from the board meeting. Boom, they walk out the door from the church. Boom, Christian nationalism. They have to be on point from day one, which is why I just find it so fascinating to consider the potential of a powerfully articulated vision of the revelation of Jesus Christ today by the church that can speak moral clarity into some of these issues. So based on this, Adventists reject the claim that most American citizens are truly Christians, which is a crazy thing to do in the 1850s. You said 1030, right? Crazy thing to do in the 1850s. They say this is bunk. Not only is America not a Christian nation by its founding, it is a complete fabrication. The facade is the word I want to use to claim that most Americans are Christians and that's what makes the United States a Christian nation. So how do they do that? How can you make the claim, the qualitative claim that most Americans are not actually real Christians, right? How does one measure that? Is it by, do you go to church attendance records? Is that how you measure that, whether or not a nation's population is truly Christian? Some of the elders here should speak. Is that how you meant, right? No, right? Warm seats don't necessarily equate to that, right? So how then does one measure that? Are there other metrics, right? So here's what they did. They drew attention to government policies. Follow what I'm saying here. How do you measure whether or not a nation is truly Christian? You don't need to look at the people, right? Look at the government policies. What do I mean by that? It gets edgy right about now. Here's what I mean by that. Government policies are an expose of the true spirituality of the population. Okay. The U.S. government is a representative institution. Come on, brother lawyer. At least back me up. Say amen. We need a little authority. I need some, credibility behind what I'm saying. I need the attorney to say amen. The U.S. government is a representative institution. Follow me now. By the people, for the people. It's what makes America great. Right? Check this out. Adventists claimed that by analyzing the nation's policies, one could judge the general fabric of society. Why? Because it is the people who select their representatives, right, to represent them in government. And it is the politicians who need to endorse policies that are in harmony with their support base. And this is why one historian said that Congress embodies the temper of the time. And then she said this: whatever the condition of the nation, of the people, Congress, listen to this language, Congress reflects that image back to the American people. Okay. From the 1850s throughout the entire 19th century, Adventists thundered from pulpit and by pen, marshaling damning evidence that the government policies that they were witnessing revealed that the nation was not lamb-like at all. One key thing, and I don't know if you may have Kevin Burton visit at some point. My friend Kevin Burton, who's his Adventist historian, quick plug here for Kevin. His book is coming out by New York University Press. Please write that down, Kevin Burton, NYU Press. His book, groundbreaking. His book has shown that early Adventists, from the Millerites and the early Adventists, that they were on the very front lines of the movement that helped put an end to slavery in the United States of America. Right? Never before seen to the extent that Kevin is pulling this out. Incredible research showing a really interesting contradiction. Here are people obsessed with the second coming of Jesus. How many of you are obsessed with the second coming of Jesus? You can say amen to that. Right? The New Testament is obsessed with the second coming of Jesus. Here are people obsessed with the second coming of Jesus. You would think that they're so focused here that they're not paying attention to what's happening here. And yet, it was the people who were in tune with their prophetic, apocalyptic worldview that were fixated on the second coming of Jesus that were front line in putting an end to the injustices and to the violation of human rights in the United States through the institution of slavery. Is it possible to be a Seventh-day Adventist and to be hopeful and fixated on the second coming of Jesus and to be incredibly socially in tune to the world around you? Yes or no? Our history tells us so, right? So the first thing Adventists look around us and they see in 1851, are you kidding me? The institution of slavery. And Jane Andrews, he just completely burns the building down on that. And then J.N. Loughborough, who's the guy who introduced Adventism in California, I think Oregon and Washington, in your backyard. That's the dude, Loughborough. He writes a piece right after Andrews, and he just goes to town, saying, how on God's earth can American Protestants walk around claiming that the United States is a Christian nation that stands for liberty and freedom, where 4,000 human beings are held as human property for sale? Right. Okay, my point. How do you determine whether or not the nation is Christian or not? Just look at the policies. Why? Because in a representative government, the policies mirror the heart of the people. And you should hear what Ellen White says about supposed Protestant Christians who were basically the backbone supporting slavery in the United States. It was religious people. I hope we're clear on that. Are we clear on that? It wasn't a bunch of atheists in the United States that were propping up the institution of slavery. There were not a bunch of atheists in the United States. You follow what I'm saying? It was the Christian establishment. And you should hear what Jane Andrews says about this as well. So it's a mirror, right? And so they would pose the question repeatedly to the readers, is America a Christian nation? Here's a news report. Check out what's happening here's a news report, right? And who do you think voted for those laws? Number 2, and I only do 2. The second thing they saw, in order to show, to put the mirror up to the American population, was Christian nationalism. They looked at case after case after case of religious intolerance in the United States. We're in the 1850s, 60s, 70s. This goes on for decades. And they show how on earth can a thinking person who has a clear vision of the person of Jesus claim that this is how can we insult Jesus Christ by attaching him to policies that constrain people's liberty of conscience and yet claim to worship God at the same time? I'm telling you, it is not light reading if you read these periodicals. The United States, this is a direct quote, the United States is lamb-like. It is a Christian nation in profession. Direct quote. But it is dragon-like in its laws. End quote. And that, my friends, this is the craziest part, was basic kindergarten Adventist teaching in the early generation. That was like basic. That wasn't, if you got up, okay, let me put it this way. If I got up in 1860s and 70s and 80s and preached that in the Adventist church, they would have been like, dude, who invited this guy? Like, newsflash, we've been preaching that for 20 years, right? It would just be like, what are you doing? I can report. Can I report to you guys from my travels? That is not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore. I actually saw a ministry friend of mine who got up. This is like last week. I won't tell you what state or what city. In an Adventist church, you know what he did? He had the audacity to read Revelation 13 and simply repeat what all the Adventist pioneers, including Ellen White, were saying about the application of Revelation 13, the landline beats of the United States of America. All he did was literally repeat what the founders of the denomination were saying. And you know what happened? Well, there were fireworks from church members, is all I'm saying. So times have changed. It is one thing to preach Revelation to Rome. Yeah, Luther was preaching Revelation to Rome, right, to the papacy, and Calvin. And it's one thing for an American in the 19th century to preach Revelation to the papacy. Yeah, but it's another thing when you start preaching Revelation to Washington, D.C., right? That's a whole different ballgame. And so this is the vision that becomes part of the Adventist collective conscious. In the early generation, Uriah Smith, does that name ring a bell? Uriah Smith, a prominent Adventist intellectual. He writes the famous Daniel and Revelation. He basically kind of codifies Adventist prophetic interpretation. He takes up Revelation 13, and he expands and expands and expands on it. So that becomes the next generation of Adventists. That's going to be on the forefront of their consciousness. I already mentioned that Ellen White puts her stamp on it in the book of Great Controversy. And together they form a movement that believes that the gospel has to challenge every form of false worship, even worship of a nation. Prophecy, this interpretation in the 19th century, it hit hard because many American Protestants, many church members, if you were to show up at a typical church in the 19th century, Christian church, it was commonly believed that the United States was the new Israel ordained by God to accomplish his will on earth. And Adventists were saying, no nation is the new Israel. The church is the new Israel. And the only nation chosen by God is the kingdom of Christ. where others were seeing the destiny of the United States, Adventists were seeing they were seeing danger. They claimed that was not disloyalty, that was simply prophetic witness. So, with that in mind, this is why I make the claim that I make, that I think the new generation of Adventists, like we have an opportunity in this new generation of Adventism to reclaim this tradition. Most Adventists, I shouldn't say most, many Adventists of my generation or of my age, in their 20s. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I'm in denial, brother. I'm in denial, right? Many young adult Adventists, right, like myself, are very put off by Revelation and the beast. And Ashley alluded to this as she started, right? The typical image that people conjure up when they think of the prophecy. But what if a new generation of Adventists were reintroduced to the revelation of Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation, not as a weird book with beasts and dragons that just makes people fixated on a future world and eyeing what's happening with the Pope in the Vatican, completely out of touch with what's happening around them. What if that same raw material were able to inspire like a heightened degree of social consciousness and political clarity on how we can better represent Jesus in our divisive world today? I think that would be extremely, extremely powerful. So a question for you. What do you guys think? What do you think? It's supposed to be Sabbath school. I feel like I've been yapping. We have a few more minutes. What do you guys think? What is your reaction when you hear something like this? What are the consequences? What are the consequences when people equate their nation's destiny with God's will? What are the consequences if you are a Christian and you equate your country's destiny with God's will? When has that inspired good? When has that justified harm? What are the implications of this? Because that is what Adventism's view on Revelation 13, that it's going to the heart of that. Anybody have any thoughts? Any reactions? We got a mic coming to you, I think. Don't be shy, this is Sabbath school.
Constantine was the first Christian nationalist, and he's the first one who brought the Sunday law. And
Who is that, sorry?
Constantine was the
gotcha.
first Christian
Constantine,
nationalist, and he's the first one who brought the Sunday law, and his concepts of what created the Catholic Church.
And he brings up a great point because I didn't mention that, but Constantine comes up over and over and over again. In fact, in the original treatises, the perfect example that Adventists prop up to why this is a bad idea to mingle religion and politics, they go back to Constantine. In fact, the history of Christianity, they view it, right or wrong, they view it like this, and then Constantine, and it goes like that, right? It goes south with Constantine instituting religion in the Roman Empire. So that's a very, very Adventist thing to say, brother.
When you believe you have divine right as a nation to do anything, that justifies a lot of atrocities and horrors, slavery being the first example. I've been reading a biography of Washington, and they were conflicted on how to make this great nation while doing this horrible thing at the same time. And ultimately, the Congress did represent what the people wanted, which was this compromised situation. And you're like, oh, we're a Christian nation that justifies evils when you put that label on it.
That sounds like it's basically the story of the United States of America, right? From the founding. I mean, from the original Puritans who showed up, right? Through every successive war. Actually, my supervisor at Cambridge, Andrew Preston, his contribution is showing how every major war in the history of the United States, even pre-United States colonial, every major war was backed primarily by the American Protestant establishment. And that's something to think about. That's something that you should be like, maybe that's something we should think about, What's going on there? So thank you, man. That's heavy.
I'm not sure if there's a question in here, so
This is Sabbath school, brother.
I know.
Doesn't have to be a question.
I like it. One thing I struggle with, I like to look at the big picture, and it's convenient how everything in Revelation is tailored to me living in the United States at this time in history. The world is massive, and I strongly believe we are all God's children, and He loves us infinitely and would do anything for anybody, whether it's here, whether it's India, China, Russia, Italy, whatever. How do I reconcile that with this whole big world? I don't know how they view Revelation. I mean, is this unique? Obviously, Adventism is spread throughout the world. It's very convenient for me, and I wonder how this is perceived in other areas.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. You're not alone on that. There's actually like Adventist scholars of Revelation that are asking that same question. And some of our European colleagues, Adventist Europeans, are like, you Americans love to see yourselves in everywhere, and you couldn't resist seeing yourself in Bible prophecy, right? Like, we're Spain in Bible prophecy. Not there, but America's there, right? So they always tease us on that, you know. I think two things, right? Two things. First of all, I think that we have examples in Scripture where very specific nations and states play prominent roles in the narrative, and to the exclusion of, as you say, this whole big world of other people groups and what have you, right? I would say, what do we do with that, right? There are specific nations named, and they play a role, and the reason they play a role, this is what like a theologian would tell you, is because there's a spotlight in history on certain events that are bringing to light significant issues in the plan of salvation, in the story of redemption, in human history, right? God, Scripture, has to identify and narrow focus on specific places, states, nations, and periods in order to bring to light this narrative of the story of redemption. That, by its very nature, is going to exclude a bunch of other places that are not mentioned in the Bible, right? So, by the way, I'll take this opportunity to say, I'm not even telling you guys, hey, you should believe that Revelation 13, the second beast, represents the United States. You do with that what you will. I'm simply saying this tradition called Seventh-day Adventism was built on a critique against that idea, right? So in one sense, your observation there, I would say early Adventist thinking on Revelation 13 actually affirms what you just said, because it is criticizing the inclination to prop ourselves up as divinely ordained or chosen by God. Like, that's literally what the prophecy is doing. It's criticizing Americans who are going to say it's all about us, right? So I don't know if that makes any sense. So I just think baked into the whole thing is a critique about seeing us as somehow essential to the exclusion of the world around us. But to do that, it has to say something specific about this nation. But there are other Adventist theologians who don't believe that, who say this is not specifically talking about the United States of America. What happened here was they were living in a particular moment in the 19th century. In their day, these symbols in Revelation 13 seem to be pointing to events happening in their day. And that's how they applied it in their day to bring meaning to their moment in history. Subsequent generations might need to make use of the raw materials to apply it in their day. You see what I'm saying? I'm just telling you what these are some of the dialogues on this issue. So I don't know if that helped at all.
I was just thinking about the beginnings of our nation. Didn't it start with people who were fleeing religious persecution? Didn't they come to this land to be able to have religious freedom? Weren't the foundations of this new world based on the Bible and the Bible as their rule of faith and practice? So that was the very beginnings.
Yeah.
So I can see where this idea that it was all ordained by God and that this nation was, set apart as a place of religious freedom, as a place where people could worship according to their conscience and according to the Bible.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, Ellen White has this classic line, just to counter that. She has a classic line that says, the Puritans fled the oppressiveness of Europe in order to worship God according to the dictates of their own conscience. They get off the boat, they step foot in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay, how do we set up a law that punishes people who don't work? What? You literally left because of that. And the moment your feet touch ground from the Mayflower or whatever, the first impulse is, okay, we need to establish laws so that we can make sure that this remains. You see what I'm saying? So that's kind of what Adventists are saying. And to go back to my Roger Williams brother, the Adventists, instead of pointing to the Puritans, well, Roger Williams was part of the Puritans, they point to Roger Williams, who was part of that same generation. But the difference is, when his feet, by the way, he's a Cambridge guy, just so you know, Roger Williams. Did you know that? He's a Cambridge guy. When he steps foot, right, his impulse is the opposite. And he's criticizing the people running the new colony, right? And he's saying, what are you guys doing? How are you going to legislate people's conscience? And you guys know what they did to Roger Williams. He literally had to run into the woods because they were coming after him to take care of him, to help him understand. He had to leave, and then he starts Rhode Island, and you guys know that story. So yeah, I get it. And by the way, none of this is to say that we can't believe, wow, God really blessed America in its founding and in its development. Are you guys following? I need to clarify that. You guys hearing me? There's nothing wrong with that, to believe. I believe God blessed America. Nothing wrong with that. That's very different, though, than to say America enjoys a special relationship with God as God's ordained nation up and above all other nations in the world, right? So I should be able to say, as a proud American, God has blessed this nation, and he has also blessed other nations as well, right? There's a difference there.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, and I'm
And
going
it's
to steal
gonna be
it.
from you?
I'm going to steal it. I'm going to dovetail with RJ, and I would like, just kind of in terms of how granular or specific we get, if you could comment on Turkey in World War I and how we may have had a bit of hubris there.
Well, I'm afraid that we're gonna lose, but yeah. So A.G. Daniels, tell me if I'm on track with your question, Ashley. A.G. Daniels was conference president during World War I, and during World War I, Adventists were absolutely sure that what was happening during World War I and that what would happen with Turkey falling during World War I would play a significant role in Bible prophecy. And if that happened, it would be a sign in the end, and it would set into motion other events. And we are literally in the last generation, and they were embarrassingly wrong, right? So I don't know what else to tell you other than they were embarrassingly wrong. And yes, it was hubris. And Adventists, because of this, because of being born as a denomination with such a strong commitment to apocalyptic prophecy, many generations of Adventists have succumbed to the temptation of coming up with all kinds of wacky theories about prophecy to try to predict things that are happening in the world, and it has been a constant source of embarrassment to the Adventist community. I know that did not help anything you said. I'm just saying that it was super embarrassing, and if you guys are interested, I have friends who did their PhD dissertation on that stuff. So yeah, Adventists have studied that, and it is a word of caution. It is a warning. And by the way, when you read Adventist literature during this period, the GC, the General Conference, puts out circular letters. I don't know how you call that. Like letters for every Adventist saying, stop being stupid. Okay, they don't literally say that, but read between the lines. They're saying, Adventists, stop being stupid. You're making us look like morons before the whole world by the stuff you're going around saying that the church never supported and that you just came up with in your closet, right? So, yeah, it's been a thing. But thank God, in closing, thank God that we don't have any of those problems today anymore.